Let's get right to my open. Democrats have so normalized hatred and violence against the President of the United States that I fear it will result in some crazy lefty trying to assassinate him. And it's not just the president against whom their rage is directed. It's all Republicans and conservatives. They are no longer the opposition party. They are the reckless party, putting lives in danger. Look, it's one thing to disagree. It's what America's all about. But we are now in a danger zone of complete hatred and chaos, unlike anything we've witnessed in American history. The normalization of calling for the assassination, decapitation, or the beating of any president is simply shocking. And it is the extension of this hatred that trickles down and motivates people like the shooter of Congressman Scalise. That shooter wasn't crazy. That's too easy. He hated Republicans and thought they should die. He was focused on his targets, cognizant enough to inquire about the specific party of those baseball players. His history was that of an individual who hated President Trump and Republicans, and he was no doubt oriented as to person, place, and time.
They don't have a message. The only message is a message of hate. The Democratic Party right now is a party of hate and destruction, and I think it's anti-American. I really do. I'm sorry. When you talk about, killing the president and doing the stuff that they've been doing, it's disgusting.
So what am I talking about? Shakespeare in the Park, where a Donald Trump lookalike is beaten, kicked, and stabbed to death in front of an audience that waits in line for hours to get in. And just this week, Johnny Depp talking about the assassination of President Trump.
This is the last time an actor assassinated a president. I want to clarify, I'm not an actor. I lie for a living. However, it's been a while, and maybe it's time.
Maybe it's time. Kathy Griffin posing with a bloody likeness of the president's head after saying she'd be happy to deliver a beatdown to 10-year-old Barron Trump. And this from Madonna.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
Charlie Sheen tweeting that he wishes God would take Donald Trump out next. And Mickey Rourke threatening to beat the president with a baseball bat, calling him the biggest scumbag on the planet. Patti LuPone, the subject of tonight's Street Justice, saying she would refuse to perform should the President of the United States walk into that theater. Why?
Tell me why.
Because I hate the how's that?
By the way, notice a theme here? They're all has-beens. Of course they're going to stand in the way of progress. They forgot what it's like to be a success. And the attempted assassination of Congressman Scalise is an example of a base that's been motivated by this hate speech. An individual who bought the talking points of the violent left. And make no mistake, there is a cause and effect, a feeling that the actions are justified. The actions are an extension of the verbal hatred. And courts have held verbal hate speech can be considered an incitement to violence or an incitement to riot. This isn't about free speech. Everyone has the right to free speech. We respect that right, and no one says you cannot speak freely. But here's the kicker. There are consequences. I don't see Republicans flipping their lids, trying to burn down buildings in ninja outfits when a Democrat, progressive, or socialist tries to speak. Real silencing occurs when a conservative, though, tries to speak at a liberal university like Berkeley, and the party of anger and violence acts on their hatred. When a police department says, we can't protect a Republican speaker. There's a reason the Democrats are in a downward spiral and keep losing. They've lost the last 4 congressional races since the election of President Trump. And while the president is focused on jobs, the economy, and our safety and security, the Democrats keep fighting over bathrooms and Russia collusion that seems more a problem to me of the Obama administration, who ignored it because they were connected to Russia and they figured Hillary was going to win anyway. But I digress. And while they continue to riot and spew their venom, claiming it's their First Amendment right, Americans see this party for what it is. A party of liberal rage, hatred, and intolerance. A party that, like their last candidate for president, has no message other than calling opponents names like homophobic, xenophobic, racist, and deplorable. It didn't work in 2016. It isn't working now. And it never will work. I worry, though, and you should worry for our president and all elected officials. In spite of the Kumbaya sung after Congressman Scalise's shooting, a state Democratic official was just caught on tape saying he's glad Scalise got shot and he wishes he were dead. The trickling down of hate is a danger to us all. And that's my open.
Some things out of the way that we all agree on. Russia has a history of cyber attacks against our country. Is that true? In the parlance of our former jobs, Russia would be considered a career offender as it comes to seeking to undermine the foundations of our republic. They are constantly trying to attack the foundations and firmament of our republic. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement.
All right. So they're a career offender. They have a history of cyber attacks on our country. We suspected before the November election. Sir?
As do others, by the way.
Yes, sir. It is. It's not just them. But for purposes of this morning, I want to focus on Russia. We suspected before the November elections that they might attack our voting infrastructure. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
In fact, you warned that they were going to do so.
I was very concerned that they would do so, which is why I kept issuing all these public statements. Yes, sir.
All right. At the time you separated from service in January of 2017, you have seen no evidence that the Russians were successful at changing voter tallies or voter totals.
Correct.
At the time you separated from service in January of 2017, had you seen any evidence that Donald Trump or any member of his campaign colluded, conspired, or coordinated with the Russians or anyone else to infiltrate or impact our voter infrastructure?
Not beyond what has been out there open source, and not beyond anything that I'm sure this committee has already seen and heard before directly from the intelligence community. So the only thing I'd have on that is derivative of what the intelligence community has and the law enforcement community.
Speaking of the intelligence community, it strikes me that most of the information currently available was available in the fall of 2016. Most of the intelligence products that are relied upon to form certain assessments, that underlying data was available in 2016, some of it before the election.
I'm not in a position to agree or disagree with that because I don't have access anymore to intelligence over the last 5 months.
Well, looking at this a different way, before the election in November of 2016, you had already seen evidence of Russian efforts to impact our election. In fact, you testified they had a preference for a candidate. They were aggressive, and I think you used the phrase plain and simple.
Yes, but with respect to efforts to hack into the DNC and other political organizations, yes, very clearly.
All right.
Correct.
Well, this is, I guess, what I'm getting at. They're a career offender when it comes to attacking the foundations of our republic. They have a history of cyber attacks on our country. You warned before the elections that they may attack our voting infrastructure. After the election, President Obama took steps to target Russia, and you took steps to consider our voting apparatus to be critical infrastructure. Given what we knew before the election, what more could we have done and should we have done? We weren't surprised that Russia was doing this to us. They always do it to us. So what more could we have done, should we have done before the election?
Well, hindsight is brilliant. Hindsight is 20/20. I'll preface my answer by saying I think it was unprecedented, the scale and the scope of what we saw them doing. And there had very clearly been intrusions before by a number of state actors, as I'm sure you're aware. In retrospect, it would be easy for me to say that I should have bought a sleeping bag and camped out in front of the DNC in late summer with the benefit of hindsight. I can tell you for certain that in the late summer, fall, I was very concerned about what I was seeing, and this was on my front burner all throughout the pre-election period in August, September, October, and early November to encourage the states to come in and seek our assistance. And I'm glad that most of them, red and blue, did. Hindsight is perfect, 20/20, but I'm satisfied that this had my attention. It had the attention of my people because I pushed them at every step of the way to make sure we were doing everything we could do. But obviously there are lessons learned from this experience, and for the future, there's probably more we can and should do.
For the states, if I remember correctly, you had a conference call or otherwise communicated with the states to offer them your assistance prior to the election.
Correct.
And if I remember your testimony correctly, their response vacillated between neutral and opposed.
Correct. Well, it was to the issue of designating them as critical infrastructure. Okay. Correct.
Do you know, without naming the states, whether any of the states most vocally opposed to that designation were in fact impacted by Russian efforts?
I'd have to look at both lists. If you're saying impacted, were those states that had their voter registration databases scanned and perhaps infiltrated? I'd have to look at both lists, sir. I don't have that information off the top of my head.
Yeah, what I'm wondering is if any of the states most vocal in rejecting your help actually needed it the most.
Well, again, they didn't reject our help. 36 of them accepted our help, but they were resisting the idea of a designation to be critical infrastructure, which I went ahead and did anyway.
What would that designation have done in November or in October? What would that designation have accomplished had